Epistle of James in the 3rd chapter. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a small, very small rudder. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species, but no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. So, from the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. This is the wisdom of God. I love Zoom. And I hate it. Isn't that about right? So let me start with the good. You know, we have this worship service right now because of Zoom. We should be very thankful. Can you imagine if this pandemic happened in 1985? What would we be doing? People who are shut in are able to participate in Zoom worship. Folks who sleep in a little bit too much and miss worship in person can attend in their PJs. That's not a suggestion, but it's a good thing. And when it snows, we can have our Zoom meetings. Those are all good things. Not so good for the church, of course, are that we don't get to see each other in person. And as a result of that, we have less income, we have difficulty reaching out to new people, and many other things. The dynamic of communication, this dynamic of communication has appeared before. Every time there is a new invention in communication, the same dynamic happens. When the telephone came out, we were able to talk with each other, but no faces to see. Email is so convenient, but now with email, there's no face and no voice. Twitter shortens the communication to 140 characters, perfect for someone who doesn't have much to say. I won't get into social media. I'll be here all morning. I've said this many times. Every new invention offers an equal opportunity for good and for evil. I would also like to add that a medium changes the message of communication, which is to say, all of those inventions, the phone, the email, all of them, including Zoom, will have an effect on how we communicate. When I look at Zoom, as I am right now, I see people in boxes. And I think that it's about being cropped or a framing. You know, when you take a picture, You have to frame the picture and choose what you want to be in the picture and not in the picture. By doing that, we interpret meaning. For example, if I want to take a picture of a bird, imagine that, and it's surrounded by industrial area, which many times it is, I can just frame it and get all that out. And when you look at the photo, you think it's in the forest. Being boxed means that we experience only what is on the screen. That's a form of limitation. Have you ever noticed in our Zoom stuff how interested we get with what's behind the picture? How many times do we want to see the woods dogs again? Or what about that strange picture that's behind Todd Miller every time? It's some famous Yankee baseball player. It's always brought up. And you never know with Zoom who's actually in the room. There could be somebody, some spouse lurking behind there somewhere, Larry. Also with Zoom, when the meeting is over, it's over. There's no hanging around, that kind of space that we all need that allows for spontaneity and organic communication. There's no equivalent of hanging out in the parking lot and talking longer, Ruth and Dolores. Long time ago, I read an article by a woman named Deborah Van Dusen Hunsinger entitled Paying Attention. And she claims from her research that 93% of interpersonal communication may consist of interpretation of nonverbal cues. Okay? She said that in 30% of communication, tone is a significant thing. In 55% of communication, facial expressions, posture, eye contact, and gesture are important to communication. Essentially, Zoom, while convenient, has its limits. At the time that the New Testament was written, the people were also dealing with a new invention in communication technology. Do we all know what it is? The letter, the epistle. Like Zoom, the letter allowed for communication that was not in person. It affected how people communicated over time, and eventually it has influenced the nature of Christianity itself. Paul was the master letter writer. I believe Paul, contrary to intuition, was an introvert who was called to preach and teach, but he actually preferred words over people. He saw letters as a way to be present with people without being actually present with them. He remained in touch with churches that way, and also he wielded authority by writing letters. And he wrote a lot of them. Not all of them that say they were written by him are written by him in the New Testament, but he wrote an unrivaled number of letters and has greatly influenced the faith. I believe James was different. More conservative, still a little more connected to Judaism, and I don't think he liked letters. We have in the Bible only one letter that he wrote, and most of it is because he wanted to contest some of Paul's ideas, who was writing so many letters, and Paul was getting out of hand, according to James. Did we really want to set all of our ideas in stone? Wouldn't that limit the winds of the Spirit? I have speculated before that if James had written more letters, Christianity would be different. I don't think James trusted words. He saw them as becoming unavoidable and important, but slippery and easily manipulated. There were deeper forms of communication for James. An integral, non-discursive connection to the Spirit of God is a way of communication. For James, words created what he called double-mindedness. We start to think in terms of this or that, yes and no, competition and conflict. For James, Paul's idea of saved by faith rather than by works of the law, while provocative and interesting, was too defining. It limits, disallows, and stagnates other ways of experience the faith. James is best known for saying, "Be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves." And he said, "So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead." Right in the start, in the first chapter, James says, "You must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, for your anger does not produce God's righteousness. If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless." Our text for today, rendered by the Message, goes like this. Part of it anyway. "It only takes a spark, remember, to set off a forest fire. A careless or wrongly placed word out of your mouth can do that. By our speech, we can ruin the world, turn harmony into chaos, throw mud on a reputation, send the whole world up in smoke, and go up in smoke with it, smoke right from the pit of hell." This is scary. You can tame a tiger, but you can't tame a tongue. It's never been done. The tongue runs wild, wanton killer. With our tongues, we bless God, our Father. With the same tongues, we curse the very men and women who are made in his image. Curses and blessings out of the same mouth. Double-mindedness. We live in a verbose culture. Garrulous, loquacious, long-winded, or if you prefer, just very wordy. And the farther we get from being in person, we have to depend more on the words and not on the other 93% of communication that we miss because we can't see and be with people. Compared with the Japanese, we are a culture that is entranced with words. We love definition, precision. It's this, it's not that. It's either good or it's bad, one or the other. Japanese words do their best to be multivalent and mysterious. Ambiguity and vagueness is valued over exactness. Language is more artful than fastidious or strict. Scientific writings, one of my jobs in Japan was to translate and to correct English, because all the writings that are scientific are presented in English because it's too hard to write them up in Japanese. In Zen Buddhism, words are totally disallowed. Chinmoku wa kinnari, silence is golden. Similar to James, words are seen as a means to control and divide. In Zen, the focus is on non-discursive direct experience. If you've heard of koans, probably the most common one are things like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Or does a dog have a Buddha nature, which means a soul? These are not meant for you to think about, but they are meant to jar one into an experience of God. In Japan, the arts are not instructed with words, only demonstration. Only a fool would ask, why is it done this way? The belief is that words tend to focus on oneself, encouraging selfishness and then argument, impaired awareness, and subsequently marred communication. Each time when I return to Japan, from Japan, one of the things I felt was Americans talk too much. Are we talking too much these days? The news has become propaganda, have you noticed? People tone each other incessantly without reflection. The words that are chosen for their power, not for their meaning or how they'll help anybody. It's a vociferous nightmare. Often communication has devolved into brawling insult and obfuscation, particularly in politics. Go to a school board meeting, I hear, and you will witness words thrown around like turgid grenades, effusive and tacky. Creative abuse is regarded more than honesty. What would James say to us? I have 3 bits of advice that I think would come. The first is, as one would expect, communication that is in person is essential. Have you noticed how much easier it is to insult somebody on email? If you're looking them in the face, much more difficult. You might even see a tear. That changes everything. 93% of communication gets lost when we lose being together. I think of it in this way, similar to how we've talked about with children having quality time and quantitative time. And I've always said, children need quantitative time. They need the space, huge space that doesn't force communication, that allows it to emerge organically. Can you imagine with a 13-year-old saying, okay, we have this 15 minutes, now tell me what you're feeling? Do you think it'll work? We need to be with each other, to really be with each other in an undefined time and space, kind of like the cow. So much of communication comes spontaneously. I've read somewhere where it's an article that said that many youth prefer to talk on the phone than being in person. They actually choose to stay at home and talk on the phone. What's going on here? Can you imagine going on a date and they're both sitting there with their cell phones and the one of them types in the how are your mashed potatoes? Being able to see each other face to face, to see the eyes of another person more than anything else, tells so much. It's essential that we be together. Paul's letters, while a wonderful thing, could not fully replace his presence. Zoom cannot replace being in person. So, I love it and I hate it. In Bible study last week in Luke, we came along this verse. Then pay attention to how you listen, for to those who have will more be given, and to those who do not have, even what they have will be taken from them. That sounds awful, but if you think, person who listens more will receive more and learn more and be more aware. So the second piece of advice is to listen long and carefully. Easier said than done. Listening is not a given. Just because you have ears doesn't mean you know how to listen. It's a practice. And it takes practice. It's something we learn. When I was in seminary, in our counseling classes, we had an exercise called verbatims, in which we were to listen to somebody, and then after we were done, to actually write down verbatim what we heard. Oh my Lord, was that hard. It was really hard to not be thinking about what I was going to say or respond and get into my mind and then not listen anymore. It's hard to listen. So many conversations in our world seem to turn into debate rather than dialogue. And if you want to win, have the best soundbite. Who cares about the truth? Listening is a practice. It takes energy and time. And I fear that we are too busy for it. And finally, the third is to be careful with our words. If technology makes words more important, since we cannot see face or gesture, the words we choose are critically important. I think we ought to carry a thesaurus in our back pocket, along with our phones. Or maybe we should put the thesaurus in the phone and be ready with it. Was it an insurrection? I believe technically it was. But how does the word insurrection affect people? It may be correct, but does it build up? Words should not serve as Molotov cocktails meant to hurt. They must be welcoming, even with our enemies, rather than meticulous. We must consider how the words we use are heard by others, whether they are correct or whether we just happen to like them. Last Sunday, I was talking about the dumbing down of America, and I used the word inane, and I said what I really wanted to say is stupid. But you think about this. If I tell somebody they're stupid, it's going to be a difficult time. So I just say you're inane. They may not even know what it means. It's a little bit better. Most important, the words we use must be from our hearts, not just our heads, but our hearts. Most of the time we are thinking of words to choose, we are in the left side of our brains, while we keep connection to the deeper feelings and vulnerabilities of our hearts hidden. The question, how is your heart today, isn't meant to elicit some kind of rational response about a subject. It's meant to awaken oneself to one's depths in the similar way that a koan is meant. I've told you, I think before, how I don't like the question, how are you? It's really quite meaningless because it's a serious question that is taken casually so that the answer is reflexive and lethargic. I'm fine. How are you? Not much communication going on there. And inevitably, it incites our minds and not our hearts. We need to hear a person's heart, not just their ideas and opinions. We need to hear them in their vulnerability and in their affect. I think James was suspicious of words because they invited a person's mind and not a person's heart. That allowed for double-mindedness, evasion, and manipulation. Was he right? I have feared that the pandemic has and further will affect our communication. In general, technology offers an increased opportunity to exchange words. It doesn't mean it helps our communication. Rather, sometimes I think it constricts actual, meaningful, genuine sharing. That's what I'm afraid we're going to begin to lose. Genuine, loving sharing. I believe James was right. Words can be dangerous and hurtful. One little slip of a word can cause a relational damage. One can bring down the whole house with what one says. So we must, as much as we're able, to be in person with each other when we can. we must listen long and hard. Try a verbatim sometime. Or we need to empty our minds enough of all that we're thinking in order to really hear somebody. I love the phrase, hearing each other into speech. Listening to the point where a person can begin to touch their own vulnerability and share it. And we need to choose our words wisely, most of all, for them to come from our hearts. I like to imagine James as a Zen master, quiet and wise. When I was in Hokkaido, I went once a week to Sapporo to sit zazen and undertake koan training. And I learned that there is meaning without words. A Christian biblical koan could be, consider the birds of the air, or enter the narrow gate, or lose your life and save it. None of these are meant for us to think, but for it to open avenues for the Spirit to touch us. It took me a while to learn to let go of words and to express what was in me without words. I don't think you can do Zen on Zoom. In closing, I'm going to read part of Psalm 19. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Day by day pours forth speech, night by night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard, yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Amen.